Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of an American Discussion Podcast. I'm your host, Drew, along with my co-host, Michael. We're going to go ahead and get into a couple interesting topics today. I think Mike's got something planned for us. So, before we get into that, Mike, how you been?
I've been pretty good. What about you?
Pretty good. We had a good weekend. Enjoyed seeing you and the wife.
Yeah.
Wish our dogs.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we ended up spending Saturday night out at a little cabin with a campsite. Mm-hmm. Just me, my wife, Andrew, and his wife. It was a lot of fun right on a river. Unfortunately, we didn't get to partake in any of the river activities. Neither one of us brought a fishing pool, and we weren't there long enough to do a paddle or a float down the river. So.
Yeah. We'll definitely have to get together with it next year. Bring the kids and actually have a whole weekend of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah and I were just talking about that maybe rent both of those cabins and plan for maybe a canoe trip down the river. Yep.
Yeah, we need to get our dogs to like each other a little bit more, though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for some reason, the two dogs named Maggie did not get along very well.
They hated each other, dude. There must have been jealousy about the name thing.
Yeah, and my dog Maggie's not normally one to get into a little scuffle with another dog like that. But I think your dog was being a little standoffish and maybe scared her a little bit.
Is. My dog always is. She's very skittish, and she's very protective of me.
Yeah, I do.
Want anyone else around me?
Yeah, same with my dog, and I do think that if we, put them together a little more often, they would probably calm down and become friends, especially if they would be able to play a little bit, without the leashes, but
and
obviously supervised.
Not such a foreign environment.
Right.
But they'll be all right. Well, they'll get over it.
Yeah, they sure will. Did you do anything else over the weekend?
Went to the lumber mill. Got some wood for a couple of cutting boards I'm making. I got one about done, and the other one I just got to cut the handles in it and chamfer the edges and do final sand, and then that one will be about ready for oil. Let's see. I checked on the bees Friday. They're doing great. I'm stoked about that. Looks like we'll have a decent honey harvest this year.
Nice. And you said that your bees almost didn't make it, right?
Yeah, I fucked them up twice. So the original transfer, I'd say there's probably 1,000 or 2 bees in it. I killed at least half of them on the first transfer, and then probably another half of that on the secondary transfer after I finally realized how to do it right. So I was probably down to about 500 bees, and now I'm up to probably 10, 12,000, somewhere in there.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of bees.
Good recovery in spite of me. But they're doing great, dude. I'm hoping to get probably 5 frames of honey. Would be amazing. I'd be happy with 2 or 3.
Yeah. Again, I have absolutely no frame of reference for how much honey that is.
Me neither.
So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I'll definitely report to everybody how much each frame of my hive creates, give or take.
But my wife and I are definitely going to buy some of that honey from you if you have enough to sell.
Oh, I should, yeah. I'll end up giving some to the wife so she can make some mead. I know that's something she's been rearing to do. And then I'll keep a few jars for me and probably sell a couple to some friends and family just so they can enjoy the fruits of the labor and wait till next year. I'll probably do a second hive next year, too.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I know Sarah and I definitely want to get our garden going. We already have one huckleberry bush that we transplanted that we're hoping makes it through the winter and, grows. It's going to take several years until we have a bush big enough to give us some berries, but that would be a nice little treat to have in our yard.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure your kids love berries just as much as mine do.
Oh, yes, they do. We're definitely not planting blackberries or raspberries in our yard because they will just take over. And if you let them go for a year, your yard needs a ton of work.
Oh yeah.
But we do like
dumb.
We do like blueberries and strawberries, and I think we might even have soil that'll support maybe like a fruit tree if we find the right type that'll grow in this climate.
Yeah, you should be able to do apples.
Oh yeah, we could definitely do apples.
Hell, 30 minutes north of you has apple trees for days.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean all around us really. There's little apple orchards and cider mills all over the place over here.
You can do cherries too. Those do well in this climate.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
I'm trying to think of what other fruits we're known for. I'm literally just going off the top of my brain of Michigan fruit exports, but
yeah, I've heard of people growing peach trees and kind of citrus fruit trees, but I don't know how well they would do without some heavy attention.
Yeah, I don't. All I know about fruit gardening, planting, is you can't plant apple seeds. You have to do splices. That's about all I know.
That is true.
Other than that, it's pretty low.
You have to graft a transplant onto another tree, basically.
So I'm looking at the Michigan fruit production page released by the United States Department of Agriculture, National Agriculture Statistics Service, Great Lakes Region. Whew, got that one out. Apparently, apples is our number one. We only have 4 major ones. So apples, tart cherries, blueberries, and peaches. There's 11,357 million pounds of apples produced, 200 million pounds of cherries, 648 million pounds of blueberries, and 568 million pounds of peaches.
Yeah, I've always wondered why people recently have been latching onto cherries as being a Michigan thing, because my childhood was apples and blueberries, but it's possible
cherries
that I grew up in a certain part.
Yeah, no. Cherries are a giant business in Michigan. I'm gonna look up real quick.
I just
state
don't
exports the most cherries.
I just don't.
Washington is the largest producer of sweet cherries. Michigan is the largest producer of tart cherries.
Oh, that's interesting. Living in Washington, we definitely heard about the cherries all the time, and got the cherries. I didn't know there was a distinction between the tart and sweet cherries, though.
Me neither. But
growing up in Michigan, I never really heard about cherries, and it seems to be very popular to advertise in the last 2 or 3 years.
We probably overtook the previous number one state.
Yeah, possibly, or it also could be linked to a tourism thing,
Mm-hmm. Very well could be.
Make it a thing that you get when you come to Michigan.
Yeah, Mackinac Island fudge, cherries, Faygo pop, burners,
kind of the same thing as deep dish pizza. What we knew as deep dish growing up, now they're calling Detroit style.
Which is fair, because Chicago deep dish is a completely different thing.
No, true, but all the pizza places just called it their deep dish pizza around here.
Yeah. No, for sure. I guess I never realized what they were calling Detroit style. I've seen it, but I just never really knew.
Yeah,
I thought it just means that the pizza guy robbed you when he dropped it off.
The stylized Detroit style pizza is a deep dish pizza that's made in a rectangular, rectangular pan, and the most popular version has sauce on the top, although that's not a requirement. For some reason, that just seems to be the most recognizable one. But it goes back to the auto industry, that they would cook pizzas in leftover parts bins because they were made out of steel, and they were, that rectangular shape that
God, what happened to America? What a time to be alive. Not a thought of ocean in sight.
Yeah, you didn't need to source food grade oil. You could use the leftover motor oil that was slicking up that pan.
Hell yeah, let it fall right out. We don't need any EPA. EP these nuts. I'm gonna eat my pizza in the factory. Anyway, off of the Detroit pizza industry. What do you got for us today, Mike?
All right. Well, we're going to talk about a topic that I actually never got into as like a deep dive or, as a book that I read, which is surprising because I have read probably at least a part of a book about every other major expedition in United States history, but that's Lewis and Clark, the Lewis and Clark expedition. So I'm going to start out by asking you a little bit about the Lewis and Clark expedition. So what do you know, just cold? I know you didn't do much research, if any. What do you know about the Lewis and Clark expedition?
Yeah, so I know it was, again, this is going off strictly memory of something I probably haven't looked into since middle school. But I want to say it was originally contracted to scout out the territory that we would later get from the Louisiana Purchase. Or maybe it was after the Louisiana, I don't remember the exact year. But it was basically to check out that space and to see if it would be possible to do Manifest Destiny. And then essentially scout the area, see what kind of plants they had, see what kind of, more importantly, tribes there were, any potential militaristic opposition to our expansion. I know that they made deals mostly and traded heavily with local tribes, which is how a lot of the explorers of the time actually made it across, as they didn't fight, they actually traded. And I know they had help from Sacagawea. I don't remember the full context of that agreement. Why she decided to go, I don't remember that. I know I knew it at one time. One thing that I do know that I remember vividly is that there are now more white-tailed deer in the United States than there were at the time of Lewis and Clark's expedition. So there's a fun Lewis and Clark fact that I have in the magazine.
That's interesting. I didn't know that, and it very well could be true. It makes sense to me based on how much farmland we've developed and how much deer
the biggest part is
farmland.
Well, it's not even that. It's mostly the conservation efforts, right? So now we actually manage the herd, and every state manages their herd. So yeah, the farmland's a big portion, but another counteracting part of that is they're losing bed down locations from urban sprawl and stuff like that. So I think it's mostly from our conservation efforts, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, less predators, which is no longer a goal of conservation efforts, but was at one time. Limiting the amount that people hunt them, and like I said, more concentrated food areas. I can definitely see leading to a big explosion in that population.
Yeah. And the mass hunting around the time of Lewis and Clark was pretty insane.
Oh yeah, definitely. As both Native American tribes and settlers moved west, they definitely hunted an overabundance.
Yeah, I don't know if you know. Sorry to get off the Lewis and Clark tangent. Another big reason why the deer's population, both whitetail and other deer, as well as the buffalo. I know those are bovine in nature, not deer, but they massacred a lot of those populations, and there's actually documents from American history that show that it was used as a strategy to starve off the American people, the Native American people. That way they couldn't oppose us. They knew that they got their lifeblood from those animals, and so they allowed for the mass killing of them just to prevent the Native Americans from being able to get them and eat them.
That is true, and there's also at least one documented case of a railway hiring hunters to essentially hunt all down the path of the railway track so that the train would not collide with the local fauna.
Yep. It's crazy how much fucked up shit we did.
That is true. Okay, so you touched on the main purposes of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So I'll just go through those briefly. So
I didn't mean to steal your thunder. If I did, I apologize.
No, absolutely. That was kind of the point. See what you know about it, as somebody that I assume hasn't consumed any specific Lewis and Clark literature or media more than the average person.
Yeah, I might have seen a YouTube video or two, but that's probably it.
Yeah, maybe a documentary once upon a time. Learning about
I
it
tend
in
to
school.
focus more on the war, so you know how that goes.
Yeah, so the main purposes of the Lewis and Clark expedition were obviously Western exploration, but more importantly, seeing if they could find a east to west water route across the United States. So if they could find some kind of route that would take them uninterrupted from the Mississippi River out to the Pacific Ocean, that was, the greatest success that they could find during this mission. That was essentially their main goal. And while they were out there, they were exploring. They were to attempt to make contact with as many native peoples as they could and try to befriend them, and also inform them that they were now under the governance of the United States of America. Because, as you mentioned, we had just bought most of that land in the Louisiana Purchase. That actually happened after the Lewis and Clark expedition was contracted, but before they actually began their expedition. Do you know what president sent Lewis and Clark on their journey?
What year was it?
It was early 1800s. We'll going back to about 1802, 1803.
Oh. Was it Jefferson?
It was Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson directed the Lewis and Clark expedition. So Meriwether Lewis was actually working as a secretary for Thomas Jefferson at the time, being specifically sought out by Jefferson, ostensibly so that he could kind of see if this guy was willing to go on this great expedition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although, we don't have any surviving primary documents that say this is why he, went out and made him his secretary. But we do know that they immediately started having talks about potentially exploring the West. So those were really the big purposes of the expedition. They wanted to, as you said, make sure they befriended as many Native Americans as they could, while also informing them that the United States government was now in charge, which we, in retrospect, know as being, the colonization of all of these people, basically. Although it's a little different because, this is the United States mainland, or what would become the United States mainland, rather than an outlying territory. So a couple other things I want to touch on before I, get into a little bit of the timeline was something that I didn't know, and I don't think most people know about the expedition, was that it was officially contracted by the United States of America, the government, and that they formed something called the Corps of Discovery. So this Corps of Discovery was essentially an offshoot of the United States military, and it was made up of, a good handful of U.S. Army personnel, as well as some other different civilian men, but they were officially drafted into this military organization called the Corps of Discovery, so they conducted themselves in a military manner throughout the entirety of the expedition. And I'll get into a little bit of why that becomes important to their story later.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Corps of Discovery. I know that they actually wreaked some pretty bad havoc. I want to say it was after the Lewis and Clark, but I could be completely mistaken.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know what the fate of the Corps of Discovery was post-expedition. It's possible that they, continued to be a group and kept going on expeditions or, doing whatever tasks they were appointed to.
Again, I could just be misremembering. That's definitely very possible. I thought they were absorbed by a different military unit, and they call. I'm literally just going off what I think I might have remembered from before. So take it with a giant mountain of salt.
Now that is definitely possible. The Corps of Discovery definitely has some attributes that you could see in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers later on. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did a lot of the later expeditions, in the Yukon and Alaska and Washington and California, as well as the U.S. Geological Survey.
I love the USGS.
Yeah, so the Corps of Discovery served basically all of those purposes for what later on would become joint expeditions. And I'd love for this to become kind of a series where I talk about my other favorite expeditions of American history, because I've always thought Lewis and Clark was pretty dramatized, and I like reading about the ones where we have primary source documents from the people themselves and articles of the time, which we do for Lewis and Clark as well. We just also have 100 documentaries and YouTube videos and podcasts and all kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely down for you doing a further deep dive into exploration.
Yeah, my two favorites are the expedition to the interior of what's now Denali National Park and the interior of the Olympic Peninsula. And I've read some pretty thick, boring nonfiction books about those because I'm so interested in it.
Because you're a nerd.
Yeah, definitely. It's what I like to do. And speaking of which, I was living about 50 miles from where the Lewis and Clark expedition ended on the Columbia River in what's now the border of Washington and Oregon, right there on the Pacific coast. So we'll talk about where they ended up, or rather when they ended up there. But it was more than likely not a fun time to arrive at the Pacific Ocean. But we will get into some of the timeline here. So another thing that I didn't know about this particular expedition was that preparations for them leaving started in 1803, and they didn't leave until 1804. So specifically, Meriwether Lewis stopped in a bunch of different places and studied with different people who were experts in their fields, learning things like how to use a sextant for navigation, botany, medicine, bushcraft skills, all of these different things that would help them along the way when they didn't have any outside lifelines, as far as a doctor, a medic, somebody who is an expert in that region for plants and animals, and when they potentially don't know which way to go. So Meriwether Lewis was the one that was contacted by Thomas Jefferson to lead the expedition, and he reached out to Clark, who was somebody that served as his superior in a previous war that they both fought in. And throughout the expedition, they led it as equals, so they were both, equally in charge. So they made all their decisions together, which is a little interesting for a military unit, as I'm sure you know.
Especially of the time, yeah.
So basically, the expedition proper begins in March of 1804, and that's when they made it to St. Louis, which was really the furthest the United States had developed to the west up until that point. So they attended some celebrations in St. Louis about the transfer of the Louisiana Territory to the United States, which opened the door to the west, and they got on their way. And right away, 2 privates in the Corps of Discovery were tried for mutiny after they threatened a sergeant's life following a physical altercation. And this was really the first big, disciplinary action of the expedition. So they were both allowed to beg forgiveness and carry on with the mission. So throughout April and May, they started west, and in May of that year, they court-martialed 3 other privates for being AWOL. One of them received 50 lashes, and the other 2 received a suspended sentence of 25 lashes.
Let me ask you this real quick. What do you think of lashing as a penalty or being as a punishment no longer being prevalent?
I think that's a pretty good thing that we got rid of that. I think causing physical pain as a punishment is not as effective as other punishments. When you're talking about positive punishment versus negative punishment, and those kind of things. I think that trying to motivate somebody to do something differently is usually more effective than causing or inflicting physical pain.
So I'm not speaking from a civilian standpoint. I'm speaking militarily. Does your opinion stay the same for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I can understand some more harsh things than we would be willing to accept in our normal civilian lives, because a military unit can be under some extreme pressures, especially in wartime, which is why I definitely understand why there are certain capital crimes that exist that are really only punished during war.
Yeah.
And speaking of capital crimes, another thing that happened in July of that year was that one of their expedition members was caught sleeping on guard duty, which was a capital crime. I did not know that sleeping on guard duty was considered a capital crime at the time. I was very surprised to learn that.
Yeah, that is weird that it is, but that's a good thing. That's how you get your whole unit killed.
Yeah, I can see that argument, but I also understand that under the pressures, people are just gonna fall asleep. So I think that's more a failure of the unit to let somebody that was that sleep deprived or couldn't be trusted stand that post. But that's just my personal opinion as somebody who's been in that kind of leadership role. I would take it personally if I.
How many times have you stood watch, like actual watch, like in a foxhole stood watch?
What do you mean stood watch in? Because I stood
not
watch
like
8 hours
building.
A day every day that I was on.
No,
on
that's
board.
a different kind of watch, and you and I both know it.
Well, it's I would argue it's a much easier watch to fall asleep on, the kind of watch that I stood, because you were
for
just
sure
sitting there doing nothing. But it's still just as important, not to fall asleep, because
oh yeah. What I'm saying is
really you've got 200 people's lives in your hand, not just your small squad of people or whoever it is that you're directly protecting by standing guard duty out there.
My attitude for watch is obviously heavily influenced by the Marine Corps being an enemy, but falling asleep on watch is how Marines get killed. Is a saying that has been beaten into my head. And there's actually historical proof of that. I know of a couple of stories that I heard from Nam when a Marine would fall asleep on watch and the VK came in and slit everyone's throats while they were sleeping.
Yeah. I'm not arguing that one is superior to the other. I mean, sailors also get killed when people.
Sorry, that wasn't my intent. What I'm saying is that the watch that you and I stood in a building is a different kind of watch than what these gentlemen are doing, and failure is much less an option when you're doing what these gentlemen were doing. Right.
Well,
so
my watches
can afford
were stood
leeway.
My watches were stood on a warship, which was what my point was with a failure of your watch station on a warship can also lead to the death of 200.
Yeah, so I think it's a little different than being in a foreign, at this point, quote unquote, foreign land that you're not familiar with, surrounded by potential combatants that you're not aware of that also have home field advantage, and they use non-explosive weapon systems, so they can be much quieter in the night. I think that's a little bit different of a scenario, and I think that being able to say it's a failure of leadership because an individual fell asleep, I don't think is fair to leadership, and I think it infantilizes the. I think they're soldiers at this point. I really don't know what they're called for the corpsmen for the Corps Discovery. I don't really know, but I think it takes a lot of responsibility.
Explorers or expedition members for now.
Okay. I think it infantilizes the expedition members and kind of takes the responsibility out of them. And I don't think that's right for the most part.
Now, I can see that, and I definitely agree with you. The individual does hold responsibility for that, but I also think that the leadership that put him in that position holds some responsibility, at least for,
some.
At the very least, not questioning if he was fit to stand duty.
Or putting two guys on duty at one time so they can keep each other awake.
Yeah, exactly. So I think to say that leadership holds no responsibility, even not knowing any of the facts, it probably not quite true. But that's just my opinion. And really, the whole point was that I was just surprised that it was a capital offense.
No, I do think that's kind of wild, especially by today's standards.
Back in 1804.
During an era of NJPs galore, it's hard to look back and see anyone actually getting real discipline.
Yeah,
especially for something,
true.
Especially for a violation like that. But
Okay, so I'm not going to go too deep into the timeline and talk about, everything that happened along the way. What I do want to point out is that they built a boat in the preparations for the expedition before they left. It was a 55-foot keel boat, which they sometimes called the boat or the barge. And they also, Meriwether Lewis also had a smaller boat commissioned, although I haven't really seen anything to say when they used that. Although, again, I haven't read any of the Lewis and Clark expedition specific books, so I'm sure there is some mention of it there or in their journals. But they brought quite a lot of supplies along on this expedition, and by the time they were headed back, they had really almost nothing of what they brought with them in the beginning, just a few things. Another thing,
that's still impressive.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and you'll see this with other expeditions too if we talk about them. They leave with a ton of supplies, and by the time they're halfway through the expedition, they've basically exhausted everything, and they're rationing out the last of their rice and bacon and hunting wild game and trying to eat edible plants and not having a good time.
Giardia.
Getting sick and not knowing why. Probably from not properly storing their game and trying to shove it in a snowbank for 10 days or more.
Yeah. Oof. I'm glad we got fridges.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I was surprised to learn about the Lewis and Clark expedition was that they did have one person die along the way, but that was their only casualty. After leaving with about 45 people, they only lost one person, and now scholars believe it was probably appendicitis that took him out. So it wasn't even really anything that they could have done anything about. It wasn't a failure in tactics or scouting or an accident along the way. Just an unfortunate medical condition.
Interesting.
So, as they went along, I know you mentioned Sacagawea. So, most people that have done a lot of digging into the Lewis and Clark expedition say that Sacagawea's role in the expedition is generally overstated. However, she did serve a very important purpose, to be a translator for the tribes that she did speak their language, or at the very least, it was similar enough that she could, kind of get their ideas across, as well as just being seen as a Native woman with a baby served to reduce the hostile intent of any of those tribes that they did encounter. So it made for better negotiations and just better relations with the Native peoples in general. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just taking them.
Okay, so what I didn't know about Sacagawea was that she was allowed to participate in the expedition by her husband and ostensibly owner, who was a French-Canadian trapper, or a trapper of French origin, that is, who purchased her from a native tribe when she was young, and then married her and fathered her child, who was along for the expedition.
Yeah, he was still a baby, right? Like an infant. He was in a papoose, I think, for the famous picture.
Oh yeah, so the paintings with the child. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the baby did come along with her on the expedition, and after everything I'd ever heard about Sacagawea, I assumed that she was kind of in their good graces. However, Meriwether Lewis, in his later writings, seemed to have a pretty negative opinion of her, although Clark did try and help her a little bit financially after the fact, but they didn't do anything special. She didn't get any big land grant or extra pay or anything like that after the expedition. Same with Clark's slave York, who accompanied them along the expedition. After that expedition, he wasn't freed or anything. He just went back to being a slave with their family, probably until he died, and nobody knows anything further about him after the fact. Alright, so another thing that I didn't know about the expedition was that somewhere in what's now North Dakota, they holed up for the winter in 1804 in what's called Fort Mandan. So they spent about a month constructing a large triangular fort surrounded by a wood picket barricade, and they spent about 6 months there repairing all of their equipment, hunting, foraging, and just regaining their strength and getting ready to set out again in the spring. So shortly after they had their winter in North Dakota, that's when they met Sacagawea and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau. And then in February of 1805, Sacagawea gave birth, and as we said, brought him along for the rest of the journey. So getting along, they did make it all the way to the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. I know I skipped over a lot of the good details there, but you could probably talk about that for days about what.
Isn't that why they split up?
Yes, so they weren't always together for the entirety of the time, but for all of their big pushes, they would do separate scouting events, kind of splitting up and exploring different places, and then coming back together after several days. Or I think weeks on a couple of occasions.
So I pulled up a map, so I'm cheating, but it looks like they split up right on the North Dakota-Montana border and didn't reconvene until the westernmost border of Montana. So they went over the entire state of Montana separate. That's crazy.
Yeah, so actually that would probably be months.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't do an incredible deep dive into the actual content of the journey itself. I would like to read the book about the Lewis and Clark expedition from their letters. That's always been an interest of mine. So I'm sure I'll learn all about the intricate details of the expedition. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode about some of the harrowing adventures that they went on.
Yeah, I'm always down for episodes about heroin adventures.
Was that heroin or heroin?
I was waiting to see if you caught it. Either or, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
I don't know if heroin adventures would be much fun to talk about.
I bet it would if you got the right guy. I was listening to this comedian who used to do heroin with the Night Stalker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him at all, but
I don't think so.
He was the mass murderer in Southern California. Richard Ramirez, I think, was his name.
Okay.
Really interesting serial killer. I recommend looking into him as part of Americana history.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
Yeah,
I may have read about him.
There's a big familiar. Netflix documentary about him not too long ago. A couple of years probably. It was called The Night Stalker. Oh no, there's one in Night Stalker in 2002. There's should have been another one more recently, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm familiar with that one. I know we tried to watch the a couple of the recent ones. What was it? Ted Bundy.
Richard Ramirez is more recent than him.
And
he was in the 80s.
So it's possible. Maybe even seen that specific documentary or show you're talking about, but I'd have to look it up. But continuing on with Lewis and Clark, so they made it to the Pacific Ocean along the Columbia River, and if you are on the Columbia at the mouth, you would definitely think that could go all the way across the continent, but as Lewis and Clark found out, it does not. You get to the Continental Divide, and all of the water starts going away from the Rocky Mountains. Now, one thing I don't know is if they had enough geographical and geological information and hydrological information, really, to know if that's what was happening. But I would guess when they reached the Rocky Mountains, they probably figured out that no river was cutting through there.
Yeah. I thought there was a big river. I remember there being a big windy river when we drove through Colorado, but I have no idea its orientation.
Yeah, you're probably thinking about the Platte River, but the Colorado River also goes through Colorado in places. And that's actually the one that cut the Grand Canyon. But again, it does not reach all the way to the Mississippi. So once they got there, they spent the winter in Oregon, and it was a pretty rough winter for them. They, struggled to keep themselves dry, along with all of their supplies, and everybody got sick, probably from, like you were saying, some kind of bacteria like Giardia, or foodborne pathogens from their poor living conditions and lack of sanitation. But also, when you're starving to death, people get some really strange symptoms that, can be kind of counterintuitive. Some people, have horrible intestinal problems like diarrhea and vomiting, which further depletes you of those nutrients and water in your body.
Water, yeah.
So, but after that, they headed home in March of 1806. So they went all the way across the Rocky Mountains again and back home, but this is where Lewis and Clark would split up. So once they got a little closer to home, they went in different directions and made it home eventually. So a couple of other things that I found interesting about the Lewis and Clark journey was that basically all of their encounters with Native Americans along their way were peaceful, and they did a great job of negotiating and, basically being humble with the tribes. They didn't try and, jam the United States government authority down their throats. They were insistent about it, but only, to the point where it wasn't getting them, stabbed or, shot with arrows or kicked off their land. And there were a couple of kind of tense standoffs, but, no shots were fired in anger. So they had a very successful journey in that respect. They also documented tons and tons of animals and plants, bringing home, over 100 examples of each. Things that people really hadn't seen before, with the exception of maybe some of the fur trappers that were getting animals way out there, and they didn't really care what it was as long as the fur was good and they could trade it for something.
Yeah, I can't imagine living in that world.
I know. I think about it like the time of Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, those old West explorers and frontiersmen. I mean, that had to be a very difficult life.
Oh, 100%. I'm sure it had its ups too, though.
Yeah, one thing that I think they actually had going for them on this expedition was that they were constantly moving. So they were constantly scouting for new sources of water and food. Whereas, somebody that's trying to settle down and live on a parcel of land in the woods, they have limited resources to work with if they want to stay in that one spot.
Yeah, so a lot like the homesteading.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even today, people try and do it, and it's very, very difficult without outside help. Which I'm not saying, most of these frontiersmen had absolutely no outside help, but for the most part, they were on their own.
Yeah, I know. I think Alaska is the last state that offers homesteading.
Yeah, it kind of depends on your definition. A lot of states have homesteading acts, which really I think have more tax implications than anything. But Alaska will pay you to live.
Yeah, they'll give you the land.
Alaska. I don't know if they're giving out land. Potentially way up in the northern reaches. But I also know they have some new agreements with the native populations up there, because the state of Alaska and United States government has done a pretty poor job with native relations in Alaska specifically.
No, you don't say. We've done pretty bad with Native American relations in pretty much every state, but yeah, what were those, Inuit people? I think they were Inuit. No. Fuck, why can't I think of this?
In Alaska?
Yeah.
Yeah, Inuit and, Aleutian peoples.
Yeah. They were historically horrible to them. I do know that Alaska offers a lot of state level, this word feels dirty to say, but privileges to native peoples, which I think is above and beyond what most states do for their native populations.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the particular legislation you're talking about, but I know that Alaska, as well as Washington and Michigan and several other states, have some like hunting and fishing and land use privileges for native peoples. Basically,
not that justifies what we did to them, but
right, but just so that they can maintain some semblance of connection with the land and living off of the land naturally, even if that's not necessarily their main source of sustenance, but just as like an important cultural thing.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off. My apologies.
No. That's totally fine. We've been going a while now already, so I'll kind of cut it off there. But yeah, I learned a ton of interesting stuff about that expedition, which again, I really didn't know much more than your average person, I would say, going into this. So most. Do you think you do now? I would say for about the next 5 days, I will know more than the average person about the Lewis and Clark expedition.
After that, it's a crapshoot.
After that, I will only remember the most useless details that will come in handy during one random conversation and one trivia board game.
It's better than I expected.
Yeah, for some reason I can just latch onto those insane details and just remember them forever. But if you ask me, what their first names were in probably even tomorrow, I won't remember.
I already don't remember the first names.
Meriwether Lewis and
there
William
it is.
Clark. And for some reason, William Clark is harder to remember because it's a much more common name.
It's easy for me as my dad and brother's name.
Yeah, that is true. Do you have any thoughts about the Lewis and Clark expedition after we've talked about a little bit of the timeline and some of the specific aspects that surprised me?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that surprised me, and I don't know why, I always thought they went kind of central U.S. I didn't think they went as far as damn near the Canadian border. I guess I didn't realize that they went that way.
Yeah, they went very far north. And I have to imagine that was because of some of the trading routes that were already established, as well as, intel that they had based on more local geography.
They didn't have intel to tell them that staying the winter in Oregon was a fucking terrible idea?
Well, probably not, because I don't think anybody that they knew had reached that far, although there were native peoples. But again, it was November when they reached the Pacific coast, so they didn't really have much of a choice. They could have, made a 1-month journey south, but they had no way of knowing what lay in store for them there. And I don't think they would have reached far enough into present-day California to make much of a difference for that winter climate. Because they were at the northern border of Oregon.
Yeah, they were way up there.
I will tell you from experience, trekking in the backwoods along the Pacific coast is not fun. Especially in all those old growth forests where you have downed logs just covered in moss and wet,
trying to
rocks and all kinds of stuff.
Trying to traverse that would be horrible.
Yeah, basically from the month of October through April, everything is just wet, slippery, and you're sinking into the muck. And everything is raining down on you when you walk through it. So
sounds like opening day last year.
Yeah, I think they probably would have ended up with hypothermia, or at least calling it quits just slightly south of where they were.
Yeah, I would have. Hell, I've been known to set up my deer blind way shorter than I initially wanted to, just for the same exact reasons. So who am I to judge?
Oh yeah. I've always envied my grandfather and my uncle for being brave enough to put all of their stuff onto a canoe and canoe through rivers and swamps in the dark on a day in deer season.
I think that'd be a riot. I would love to do that.
Oh yeah, it would be fun, but man, you're gonna be wet and you're gonna be miserable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still down for it. I think we should do a what do they call those? Portage? No, portage. Portage.
With the canoe.
Yeah, let's do it.
Pick it up and carry it over land and put it back in. Keep
I've
going.
got the canoe. I'm sure we can manage. Speaking of hunting, what are you doing for season this year, Michael?
I don't know why, but I thought you were about to segue into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and
no.
I was trying to figure out how I could lead you there without making a terrible joke.
I mean, I'm always for a terrible joke. I was more trying to segue into inviting you to come hunt with me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would definitely be down. I'm sure I'll go out with, some of my family around here. They're always inviting me, even when I was just coming home to visit. So I'm sure I'll go out a couple of times. But yeah, if you want to go over in your neck of the woods, definitely.
Yeah, I take opening week off from work every year, so I've been skunked the last 3 years. Last year I had one of my sights. I took a shot and I had a primer not ignite. That was the most deadening, stomach dropping clunk of my entire life.
Oh, you hate to see it. Were you talking about muzzleloader or?
No, it was my 30-30.
Oh, really? Okay, so an actual cartridge round.
Yeah,
interesting.
It struck the primer, and the primer didn't ignite, and that's all she wrote. It was a doe. It was a nice sized doe. There's actually 3 of them that I had seen the day before, but it was too dark. It wasn't shooting hours, so I put some doe piss down in a different area just to try to get them to slow down as they were coming through, and it worked. And as they came over this little berm in front of me, I get my sights on it, I get it lined up, I do my exhale, and then clunk, and then she looked me dead in my fucking eyes and went and just took off, dude. Never saw her again.
You hate to see it. Yeah, the last time I was out was probably 2 years ago, when I was home for a visit, and I took a shot at a doe and missed. So, but then again, I was using one of my relatives' muzzleloaders.
I've also missed a doe with one of your relatives' muzzleloaders.
Yeah, I was gonna say it may have even been the same weapon.
It's a bad luck rifle.
So.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely gonna hit it this year. I'm probably gonna go up north here in the next couple weeks and put out a couple trail cams, kind of see what we can see. I got a couple cellular trail cams for Christmas last year, so I'm gonna put those out and see what we can look at.
Oh, nice. Are you do you have a specific place that you like to go?
So I found a good spot last year. The 2 years before that, the spots I went were just too thick. I wasn't getting any good lines of sight. I did have a deer. I saw 2 deer the year before. I was sitting in a blind, and the opening day was probably, I want to say 55-ish degrees. By the end of the second day, there was about 3 inches of snow on the ground. So I'm sitting in my blind, and I hadn't seen shit all day. It was towards the end of sunrise, end of the twilight hours. So when you start seeing a real slowdown in movement. So I was like, you know what? It's cold as shit. I'm going to go ahead and pack it in here in the next about 45 minutes if I don't hear anything. And then I was sitting in my blind, just looking. I only had one shooting lane, so it was pretty easy to maintain it. And then all of a sudden I hear rustling, and I can't tell. I was like, is this like squirrel rustling, just fucking with me, or is it actually something? Because you can usually hear that thump and the rustle. And I didn't hear the thump, and then I don't hear anything for probably about 30 seconds. I'm like, must have been a squirrel. And out of nowhere, it sounds like there's a fucking 55-gallon drum bouncing down the side of this hill. That's to my back left. And all of a sudden, I see my entire blind shifts about 3 feet and stops when the wall touches my arm. and I see the ass end of a deer fly past my fucking blind window. The deer had tumbled down the hill, and then caught the stake line of my blind, and tumbled right past me, and then got up and fucking bolted. And I'm just like, I didn't have my rifle because I thought it was a squirrel out for one, and then then my rifle fell to the ground because I had it leaning like up against the opposite wall of my blind, and when my blind shifted, my gun fell. And then the fucking deer looked at me like I was an idiot. Like I'm the one that fell down the hill, and then he took off. So. Man,
it's almost similar to the story of when you and I were out there, and you took a wild shot at that deer. not a wild shot, but a running shot.
Yeah, I stand by. If that was a cartridge rifle, I would have hit that deer.
I doubt.
I was not at all prepared for it. I guess we'll never know.
It's a good fishing story.
It helps me sleep at night. All right. I wasn't prepared for the delay. I think the last time I'd shot a muzzleloader before that was when I was at Gettysburg as a young teen.
Well, we did some black powder rifle in Scouts.
Yeah, no, I think that was the last time I did it.
That wasn't, wasn't quite the same as an improved modern muzzleloader.
Yeah, no. I actually have a picture of it. I think the last muzzleloader I shot, I was wearing a red T-shirt. I remember it. And American flag ball cap.
I did get my bull elk with a muzzleloader, so I know that they actually work. But
I don't doubt they work. It's a 50 caliber round.
As many times as I've been out deer hunting in Michigan with a muzzleloader, sometimes I wonder.
Yeah, no,
I've probably taken 3 shots at whitetails with the muzzleloader and never hit them.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of muzzleloaders. It's just not my forte.
But
I know there's some old timers out there that never miss a shot. They can shoot a quarter at 100 yards with a muzzleloader and not even look.
So part of the problem is that when we are using muzzleloaders, it's somebody else's gun that's not sighted into our eyes, right? So
yeah,
everybody has a little bit different sight picture and tendency when they pull the trigger. So if somebody's got it sighted in for 100 yards and they always pull to the left a little bit and you don't, you're gonna miss high and right.
Yeah. Eye relief is also a big one as well. I think that's where I see most of the difference between shooters.
Yeah,
and comfortability, obviously, but
yeah,
anticipating
that's
the
definitely
shot.
true. If you're
like
not used to shooting a muzzleloader, you're definitely gonna pull your shot a little bit based on like you were saying, that delay, and then differences in how it feels in your hand. But I think I would sight in for a lot closer of a target based on the range that I've taken shots at whitetails here.
My first year back, I had my rifle sighted into 100 yards, which is the standard Marine Corps zeroing.
And then you saw a deer at 40 yards. Let me guess.
And it's like, dude, every deer I've seen since I sighted into 100 has been 50 or less. 50 stretching it. Probably closer to 30. Just because of how naturally thick the brush is in Michigan, you're just not going to get a clean or ethical shot on a deer very far out, unless you're, camping power lines or something like that. But for the most part, you're going to be inside of 50 yards, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I'm always in dense, forest or brush like that. I'm always worried about other hunters as well.
Yeah, I think about that, but I'm one of the freaks that's in my blind an hour and a half before sunrise. Minimum. And so I hear most of the people come out after me. So I usually have a pretty good general idea of where everyone's at. Especially because a lot of dipshits use white light, like right before fucking sunup, which drives me up a wall. But maybe that's just me bitching.
Yeah, my point was more like if you see something that looks like a deer, but it's so far away that it's behind 17 different trees, and you're trying to take a shot through the trees. You never know.
Yeah, no,
classic story.
That falls out of your ethical shots. Those are the shots you shouldn't take.
Oh, absolutely.
At least in my belief, I'm a pretty big proponent of the firearm safety rules, and that's one of them. So, know your target and what lies beyond it.
Yep. Hunter safety
so I'm not
101.
I'm not a huge fan of taking shots that I'm not very confident with, whether that be at a range in someone's yard, out in the woods. I tend to be very diligent about that. I'd rather not take the shot, one, for fear of hurting someone else, but also for fear of not fatally wounding an animal, just critically wounding it, right? To the point where it's going to die, but it's not going to die for a couple days, and it's just going to suffer. That would weigh on my conscience. So I think that shot I took with you in that blind that day is the least ethical shot I've ever taken.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a little bit of question about what lay beyond where you were shooting. If I recall correctly, there was a kind of a dip over the hill after that. So if you missed high, it could have gone for a while. But we were out in the middle of a forest area with really nothing around.
No, there was a symphony of gunshots around us. So there's definitely people out there.
That is true.
So that was a concern.
Yeah, just take that as a reminder. Always make sure
I think about it all the time now.
Make sure you know what's beyond your shot when you're out there hunting in the woods, everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Dude, I swear I had nightmares for about a year after that I had shot somebody in them woods.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was scary.
That's awful.
So I've never done it since. I don't shoot at a deer that's moving at more than a couple of steps a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I tend to find myself setting up in a bowl where I have a pretty good reason to suspect that deer will funnel in either to the bottom of the bowl or across the side. So I have a natural backdrop. I think that's just some subconscious thing. I don't necessarily think about having that great backstop, but I do always think about it when I do sit down.
Deer tend, at least from what I've noticed and what I've read, don't tend to go into bowls that much just because of the predator threat. And actually, if you do a lot of stalking, or I know our military training talked about it a lot, especially with skylining, is that if you watch prey animals, they'll teach you how to stalk better than a predator, because they're the ones trying to get away from predators, so that's what you need to mimic, right? You rarely see deer sitting on top of a ridgeline, right? You'll rarely see deer in the middle of a river, where they don't really have an escape route. You tend not to see that. They tend to make much better decisions than us humans do.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying with the deer skirting along a ridge. I might miss them as they go on the other side, but if it's a pretty good funnel from somewhere else, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to come into at least the side of where I'm sitting.
Yeah. I also will go out typically a couple days before, kind of scout out tracks, see if I can find any scat, anything like that, and then set up in a relatively high traffic, offset on a relatively high traffic area. The spot I was in last year was a great spot, and I think I'm going to go back this year. It was in a timber management area up north by my mom's cabin, and it took me about 30 minutes to get there to the site, and then probably about another 30 minutes to hike out to my blind, maybe 45. But it was a good spot, and it was right off the road, so I could see down the roadway both ways. I could also see a big opening that had a small depression. I'm talking maybe a couple of feet of vertical gain total. So not a huge dip, but enough that, it would settle down. And it was on right off of a clover bed with acorns pretty close as well. So it was a nice little setup. I saw a deer 3 out of the 4 days I was out there. The third day is when she huffed at me and I didn't see her the next day. So there was that, but I think I'll be going back this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you care to share your spot, I'd love to join you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm taking the 14th through the, I want to say the 20th. I'm gonna have to look off, so I'll have that whole. I'll be out there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of deer season, more than likely. So unless I get a couple and then I'll leave early, but I doubt that.
Well, between the two of us, maybe we'll get lucky.
Yeah, I'm down. Get you $100 blind and we'll set up a push and receive lane.
Yeah, I gotta go shopping for a new gun too.
If you're buying a gun for Michigan, I recommend the 450 Bushmaster. Just because it's
I'll take
everything
a look.
you need in a rifle. Yeah, it's everything you need in a rifle, but it's a straight wall cartridge, so it can be used south of the rifle line.
Yeah, perfect.
So that's my next gun, and then I'm gonna buy. I'm gonna get one of those, and then I'm probably gonna get a 12 gauge after that. But 450 Bushmaster is the way to go, just because you can hunt anywhere in Michigan with it. Even though if you look up that caliber, it's a ridiculous fucking round. Like the fact that that's a Michigan law, that the differentiation isn't in the rifled barrel for the rifle shotgun line. It's in the cartridge can't have a taper. So technically a 50 BMG straight wall, legal south of the line.
Yeah, I think that rule was probably written before they started.
Before straight wall cartridges?
No. Before they started manufacturing, or I guess mass producing guns that could, get that kind of velocity in a straight wall cartridge.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. But that's a good one to do. They are a little pricier. I think primer to round tip, they're about the same size as a 5.56. They're just much wider. But you can get them in all sorts of different platforms. You can get them in the old wooden stock variant. You can get them in a polymer stock hunting rifle style, non-pistol gripped, or you can get them in an AR platform. A whole bunch of different options. You can also go for the 350 Legend. I believe that's also a straight wall cartridge. That is good for south of the line. So two options I would go if you're looking to buy a new rifle. Obviously the 350 Legend is going to kick less than the 450 Bushmaster, but a 450 Bushmaster is going to put down anything in Michigan.
Yeah, interesting. Anything. I'm seeing a magazine fed bolt action that looks right up my alley.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'd recommend. Obviously you're gonna get glass too. I recommend the Calameter I have for my AR. I have a 6-hour MSO Tango LPVO. Which is a 1 to 8 Calameter, which basically means it can go from 1 times, and you can throw a lever to make it go all the way out to 8 times magnification. And I think I paid $300 for it, or $350, something like that, which in the world of glass is very cheap for a Calameter like that.
Interesting.
So when you're looking at that, hit me up and I'll help you out. Obviously, that's in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I definitely will.
So speaking of rifles, this most recent assassination, how do we feel about that?
I feel like it's bad.
Good.
Bad things. Although I do think it's good things that he was thwarted in his attempt, and as far as all the reports that I've seen, didn't manage to even get the President Trump in his sights. Sounds like the Secret Service detail caught him about 2 holes ahead of where Trump was golfing.
Yeah.
And they actually, from one report that I read, saw his rifle barrel sticking out of a fence. So, not great tactics by the guy involved, but I wouldn't expect much from him after what I've heard.
I would argue though that he was there for 12 hours unseen, which dedication. He also had, I keep hearing people say ceramic tiles on the media. I don't know if they mean ceramic plates as far as like a
Probably.
plate carrier armor plate, or if they mean he just had like Home Depot ceramic floor tiles. I don't know what they're talking about.
I mean, the media reports that I've seen said that he was wearing body armor.
No, but I know the photo, which first and foremost, it really pisses me off that they keep calling it an AK-47 style rifle. That is clearly an SKS. And while it shoots the same round as an AK-47 in the 7.62x39 steel case, it is not the same gun. It's
definitely not.
It's ridiculous. To call that an AK-47 is like calling an M1 carbine AR-15. Like, not really. They shoot the same round, but they're not the same thing. So that was a big complaint I had with they're obviously rage baiting against. They're trying to use that AK-47, that scary gun from the Cold War, to increase fear from the event. Which, whatever. But it's wrong, and they need to fix that because it's annoying to me. If we're going to report, let's be accurate. I'm sure you guys can find a firearms instructor that would be willing to clear up the air on your guys' reporting. But I digress. He also had 2 backpacks I saw that they appeared to be zip-tied to the fence. And I think that's what they're saying he had the plates in. But yeah,
interesting.
At the point you're bringing all that stuff, you can set up
cover. That's possible. I mean, if he was using that as some kind of cover, maybe it was just actual ceramic tiles.
Yeah, I have no idea. But the problem is if you can't adequately classify the weapon, I can't trust you to accurately classify the potential armor. So I really have no idea. And I don't know the ballistic rating for a Home Depot ceramic tile. But I'd imagine it's pretty low.
Yeah, possibly, although ceramic is pretty good at absorbing impact and deflecting bullets, but when it comes to taking on a full Secret Service detail, I don't think they're going to last very long.
No, I don't think he had a chance in the beginning. I think he was kind of screwed no matter what he did. Which good, he should be. I'm not a proponent of people doing bad things like that. I think political violence is atrocious, and I think it's counterproductive. I've never seen a United States assassination that happened and the population was like, oh man, what a great assassination, that was a good thing they got rid of him. Like,
definitely. I agree with that. I think that an assassination attempt like that is uncalled for, and has no place in our politics. I know this is a highly charged election season, just like the last 2 have been. But there's really nothing that would point towards, our country being in danger just by this guy existing, right? Like, we're not talking about an active dictatorship that's committing genocide or something like that.
I agree. I think that's a big problem with
I could see some kind of action like that being more justified in the view of the populace. And I think maybe your topic next week will go into a little bit of that.
My next topic's going to more than likely be, spoiler alert, Woodrow Wilson. Background on Woodrow Wilson, because I think he was the worst president of the United States. For a couple of reasons. A huge First Amendment violator, and obviously I'll get into specifics on that in the next one. Devout racist. He even showed a screening of Birth of a Nation in the White House. So yeah, real world-class piece of shit. But he tends to get a positive rap because he fought for the League of Nations to become a thing. Nobody ever talks about at what cost, and that's another thing I'll get into. How it was almost how what he did heavily played into us getting Hitler as a person of power during that time frame, as well as him having I don't blame him for the stroke he had, but his wife running the country for 2 years after he had a stroke is also insane. So a whole lot of interesting stuff to hate about Woodrow Wilson. I'll obviously get into a lot of that more later, but that's probably what I'm going to go into.
Yeah,
and now I don't even remember what you said I should.
That was not to say that I think Woodrow Wilson was deserving of an assassination, but that it was third level thought down the line there.
I think if there was presidents of the United States that warranted it more or less, I think Woodrow Wilson would be in the conversation. Because there's strong arguments for him being a tyrant at the least. But again, I'll get into that further. And I still don't think he should have been assassinated. I just think he should have never became president. And it's also really interesting how he got there. So I'm going to leave that for the next podcast. But I feel like he's one of the most important presidents that no one's ever talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely don't know a ton about his presidency, so that'll be interesting to learn some more about that. We are getting pretty close to wrapping it up here. Do you have any other thoughts you wanted to say about the assassination attempt or Lewis and Clark or anything we talked about?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for the assassination to see what comes of it. I think the fact that they arrested him and got him alive is very interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see what he says. I do think that given the previous assassination attempt and how muddy the waters have been since, I think I would personally prefer if the state of Florida did the investigation, just to eliminate the calls for bias, because no matter what comes out, one side or the other is going to blame bias of the federal government and the DOJ that is currently being run by the administration that is the opponent of the proposed victim. So I think leaving in the hands of the state of Florida for the investigative part, the collection of evidence and things of that nature would be better, personally. I don't think that's ever going to happen, seeing as an assassination attempt on a political figure. I think that gives original jurisdiction to the federal government. That's just something that I think would clear up a lot of conspiracy talks. Obviously, Florida's a red state. If they investigate this guy and they find nothing, there's really nothing for Republicans to buck at that point, right? Because I'm going to quit beating around the bush. We've all heard the conspiracy theories that they think that either Trump set this up on his own to boost his ratings, or that the Democratic Party put out the hit on him, right? I've heard both conspiracies. I don't think there's enough evidence to support either or, but I think a lot of that would be cleared up if we eliminate the muddying of the waters with the Biden DOJ investigation.
Okay, I can definitely
use the state.
I can definitely see an argument for that. I think the FBI handling it is totally fair in my book. I would trust an FBI investigation as long as it was, conducted in conjunction with, the other authorities under really any presidency. Although there has been history of, kind of people in power trying to silence even nonpartisan organizations like that. And we can debate whether or not the FBI is a partisan or nonpartisan organization at a different time. But what I think would be interesting is if you invited it to be a joint investigation by another federal entity, federal agent that was definitely nonpartisan, and you could do USPIS, the Postal Service Investigation Service, or a military investigation service like NCIS.
I would be okay with an NCIS investigation.
Or the Border Patrol.
Nah, I don't necessarily think that would be too particularly useful, but I'm down to the NCIS. I'm also down for the Postal Service. But those would be the only two that I'd be okay with on that.
Yeah, if you didn't know, the Postal Service does have its own criminal investigation branch that are federal agents with a badge and a gun
and arresting authority.
Yep.
So quit opening your spouse's mail.
Or they're gonna come for you and your dog.
We all know feds like to shoot dogs.
Well, that's the first thing they do.
Yep. Fucking bastards. If that's not a reason to be mad at our government, I don't know what is. Quit killing the dogs. But back to that, I think that whether it is true or not, a large narrative in this country is that the DOJ, and I know you and I differ on our beliefs on this, but the DOJ has been used as a weapon against Donald Trump already. Again, whether it's true or false, that is a narrative that is out there within the country, and it's got a pretty heavy following as far as people who believe it to be the case. And I think that having that DOJ step back would help alleviate some of that.
Yeah, I could definitely get behind that as long as we have a clear path for investigation, and it's not going to get all jammed up with conflicting interests that can just make things worse, I think.
I don't see what conflicting interests there would be there, though. You know what I mean? Unless we admit that there's partisanship within law enforcement branches.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely
I don't see how we would
be
have a conflicting interest.
Especially if there's a political aspect to the person that gets appointed to lead an investigation, and their potential marching orders from whoever enlisted them. But that's kind of all conjecture and stuff that we can talk conspiracy theories on after the fact, really. But I think we had a great discussion. I don't really have anything more to add. So I'm excited to hear your topic for next week.
For sure. I think we did good time this time. I think we covered a lot of stuff. I appreciate you bringing up some of this Lewis and Clark information. And I'm looking forward to deer season. So unless you got anything else, I'm going to wrap it up how we usually do, Mike.
And that's all I got.
All right. Well, until next time, I love you, buddy.
I love you too.
And I want to thank everybody that is listening. It's really important. And if you'd like to pitch in the future, feel free to shoot us an email over at anamericandiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great day.